It was a cold December evening when Lisa found herself sitting on her bedroom floor, surrounded by boxes she hadn't opened in years. Her father had recently moved into a smaller apartment, and these boxes were the leftovers from her childhood home. Old report cards, birthday cards, random toys she forgot existed, but it was the photo albums that made her stop everything. She pulled out a heavy album with a brown leather cover, the kind people don't really use anymore. The pages crackled as she turned them. Most of the photos were from before she was born, back when her mom was still alive. There were pictures of family barbecues, birthday parties, people she recognized and some she didn't. Then she saw it. The photo was taken at what looked like a community center. There was a Christmas tree in the corner, kids sitting on the floor and adults standing around talking. Her mom was there, probably around 8 or 9 years old, wearing a red sweater, but it wasn't her mom that caught Lisa's attention. It was the boy in the background. He was standing alone near a doorway, maybe 6 years old, with this serious expression on his face. Most kids in the photo were smiling or making funny faces, but not him. He looked like he was watching everything carefully, like he didn't quite belong there. Lisa stared at that face for a long time. Something about it felt familiar, but she couldn't figure out why. She set the album aside and kept unpacking, but her mind kept going back to that boy. 2 weeks later, Lisa was scrolling through her phone during lunch break at work. She was a teacher at a middle school, and her lunch breaks were usually the only quiet moments in her day. A news article popped up about David Park, the CEO of a massive tech company called Nexus Systems. The headline was something about him donating $50 million to education programs. Lisa almost scrolled past it. She wasn't really into business news, but then she saw his photo. Her thumb froze on the screen. That face, those eyes, the serious expression. She quickly closed the article and ran back to her car where she'd left her bag. Inside was the old photo album. She'd been carrying it around, meaning to show her aunt some of the pictures. Her hands were shaking as she flipped to that Christmas photo. She held her phone next to it. It was him. It had to be. The same distinctive eyebrows, the same shape of his face, even the way he held his mouth. Sure, one was a little kid from the 1970s and the other was a 50-year-old billionaire, but the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Lisa sat in her car, staring at both images, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. David Park was one of those people everyone knew about, even if they didn't follow tech news. He'd built his company from nothing, become insanely wealthy, and was always in the news for some new innovation or charitable project. His story was the classic American dream. Immigrant family, worked hard, made it big. But what was he doing in her family's photo from Detroit in 1978? That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about it, running through possibilities in her head. Maybe it was just someone who looked like him. People have doubles, right? But the more she looked at the photo, the more certain she became. She tried asking her Aunt Beatrice the next day. Beatrice was her mom's younger sister and the only person left who might remember that time. "Aunt B, do you remember this Christmas party?" Lisa showed her the photo. Beatrice squinted at it, putting on her reading glasses. "Oh wow, that's at the old community center on 4th Street. Your grandma used to take us there for everything. Christmas parties, summer programs, all of it. Do you know who this boy is?" Lisa pointed to the kid in the background. Beatrice looked closer, then shook her head slowly. "Honey, that was over 40 years ago. I barely remember most of the people in this picture." She paused, tapping the photo. "Actually, your grandma used to volunteer there a lot. There were always kids around, some from the neighborhood, some from other situations. She had a big heart, you know. Other situations? Foster kids. Kids whose parents were struggling. The center was like a safe place for everyone. Your grandma, she treated all those kids like her own." Beatrice smiled sadly. "She would have loved knowing you became a teacher. You got that same caring spirit." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Foster kids. David Park's official biography said he was adopted, but it never mentioned where he was from originally. Most articles just said he was born in the Midwest and adopted by a Korean-American family who moved to California when he was young. Over the next few days, Lisa became a bit obsessed. She spent hours researching David Park, reading every interview, watching old videos, looking for any clue about his childhood. But there was almost nothing. He never talked about his early years. When interviewers asked, he'd give vague answers and change the subject. Some articles mentioned he was private about his past, that he preferred to focus on the future. The more she searched, the more questions she had. If this really was him, why was he at her family's community center? Did he know her grandma, her mom? And if there was a connection, why wouldn't he talk about it? Lisa's friends thought she was reading too much into it. "Girl, you found a kid who looks like a billionaire," her best friend, Kelly, said over coffee. "So what? Lots of people look alike. You really think you're related to David Park?" "I'm not saying we're related," Lisa argued, though the thought had crossed her mind. "I'm just saying it's weird. This is my family's photo from our neighborhood, and he's in it. Have you considered that maybe he just lived in Detroit back then? It's not that crazy." But Lisa couldn't let it go. It wasn't just the physical resemblance. It was the feeling she got when she looked at that little boy in the photo. The way he stood apart from everyone else. The look in his eyes that seemed to carry something heavy, something a 6-year-old shouldn't have to carry. She knew that look. She saw it sometimes in her students, the ones who came from tough situations, the ones who were in foster care or bouncing between relatives. They had this guardedness about them, this way of watching the world like they weren't sure if they could trust it. 3 weeks after finding the photo, Lisa made a decision. She was going to contact David Park. She had no idea how, and she knew it was probably impossible, but she had to try. Something deep inside told her this meant something. That little boy in the photo deserved to know someone was looking at his picture, wondering about him, caring about where he came from. Even if everyone thought she was crazy, even if it led nowhere, she had to try. She pulled up the Nexus Systems website and clicked on the contact page. Her cursor hovered over the email form. What would she even say? "Hi, I think you're in my family photo from 40 years ago?" It sounded ridiculous. But then she thought about her mom, who passed away when Lisa was just 15, and her grandma, who died a few years after that. They'd both been the kind of people who believed in connections, in reaching out, in not letting important things slip away just because they seemed difficult or unlikely. Lisa started typing. Her message was simple. She explained who she was, described the photo, and said she thought it might be important. She attached a scanned copy of the picture. Before she could second-guess herself, she hit send. The automated response came immediately. "Thank you for contacting Nexus Systems. Due to high volume, we cannot respond to all inquiries." Lisa closed her laptop and laughed at herself. Of course, what did she expect? A billionaire CEO doesn't personally read random emails from teachers in Detroit. But she'd done what she felt she needed to do. The rest was out of her hands. What Lisa didn't know was that her email wouldn't disappear into the void. It would take a strange path through the company's system, and in 3 weeks, it would end up in front of someone who would recognize the importance of what she'd found. Everything was about to change, not just for her, but for the man in that photo too. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Lisa checked her email obsessively at first, then less and less as reality set in. Of course, a billionaire wasn't going to respond to her random message. She'd done something impulsive and slightly embarrassing, and now it was time to move on. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. She put the photo on her nightstand and found herself looking at it before bed. That little boy's face had become almost familiar to her now, like he was someone she actually knew, rather than a stranger from a 40-year-old picture. "You need to let this go," Kelly told her one afternoon as they grabbed groceries together. "It's becoming unhealthy. You're obsessing over a photo." "I know," Lisa admitted, tossing a bag of apples into the cart. "I know it sounds crazy, but what if it means something? What if there's a real connection there?" "Then he'll respond. And if he doesn't, that's your answer." Lisa nodded, but inside she wasn't ready to give up completely. She started researching other ways to reach David Park. She learned he did speaking engagements occasionally, usually at big tech conferences or university commencement ceremonies. Most were invitation-only or prohibitively expensive to attend. Then she found something. A 3-day technology and innovation conference in Chicago, scheduled for April. David Park was listed as a keynote speaker on the second day. Tickets were $800. Lisa stared at the price on her screen. That was nearly half of what she had in her savings account. It was money she'd been putting aside for a new car, since hers was making concerning noises and had over 200,000 miles on it. She closed her laptop and tried to forget about it. But over the next few days, the idea wouldn't leave her alone. This might be her only chance to actually get in the same room with him, to show him the photo in person where he couldn't just delete an email or have an assistant dismiss it. A week before early bird registration ended, Lisa bought a ticket. She immediately felt a mix of excitement and dread. What was she doing? Flying to Chicago? Spending money she didn't have to chase down a billionaire about an old photo? Her dad would think she'd lost her mind. She didn't tell anyone except Kelly, who sighed heavily on the phone. "I hope you know what you're doing." "I don't," Lisa admitted. "But I have to see this through." The weeks leading up to the conference dragged by. Lisa taught her classes, graded papers, attended meetings, but part of her mind was always on that upcoming trip. She practiced what she might say 100 times. She even had the photo enlarged and printed at a professional shop, mounted on a stiff board so it wouldn't get damaged. The night before her flight, she barely slept. She kept wondering if this was all a huge mistake. But in the morning, she got on the plane anyway. Chicago in April was cold and windy. Lisa had never been there before, and in different circumstances she might have enjoyed playing tourist. But she was too nervous to do anything except walk around her hotel room and rehearse her words over and over. The conference was being held at a massive convention center downtown. When Lisa arrived on the second morning, she was overwhelmed by the size of everything. Thousands of people, all of them looking confident and important in their business clothes. She felt completely out of place in her simple dress and cardigan. David Park's keynote wasn't until 2 in the afternoon. Lisa spent the morning wandering through the exhibition halls, not really seeing anything. She clutched the folder containing the enlarged photo and tried to calm her racing heart. When she finally entered the main auditorium for the keynote, it was packed. The room could hold at least 2,000 people, and nearly every seat was filled. Lisa found a spot toward the middle, not too close but close enough to see the stage clearly. The lights dimmed, and David Park walked out to thunderous applause. In person, even from her seat, Lisa could see the resemblance to the boy in the photo even more clearly. He was older, obviously, more confident, wearing an expensive suit. But those eyes, that serious expression, they were the same. He spoke for 45 minutes about innovation, about taking risks, about believing in ideas that seemed impossible. He was articulate and funny, making the audience laugh several times. He talked about failure and persistence, about how his company had almost gone bankrupt 3 times before finally succeeding. But he didn't mention his childhood. He didn't talk about where he came from or who helped him along the way. His personal story started when he was already in college, as if his life before that didn't matter or didn't exist. When he finished, the audience stood and clapped. Then came the part Lisa had been waiting for, the Q&A session. A woman in the front row asked about artificial intelligence. A man in a suit asked about international expansion. Someone else asked about his philanthropic work. David answered each question thoughtfully, sometimes seriously, sometimes with humor. Lisa's hands were sweating. She knew she had one shot at this. If she chickened out now, she might never get another chance. But her throat felt tight and her legs didn't want to move. Then she thought about her mom, about her grandma, about that little boy who stood alone in the background of a Christmas party, looking like he didn't quite belong anywhere. She stood up, her hand shot up, and she was suddenly grateful for all those years of teaching, of speaking in front of people, because her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Mr. Park, I have a different kind of question." The microphone runner was making their way toward her with a handheld mic. David smiled politely from the stage, probably expecting another business question. Lisa took the microphone. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She pulled out the enlarged photo and held it up high. "Mr. Park, can you tell me why you appear in my family's photograph from Detroit in 1978? The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. People turned in their seats to look at her, then at the stage. David Park's smile had frozen on his face. For several long seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then the whispers started. People were pulling out their phones, trying to zoom in on the photo Lisa was holding. A security guard started moving down the aisle toward her. David held up his hand, stopping the guard. His face had gone pale. He took a few steps forward on the stage, as if trying to see the photo better from where he stood. "Can you bring that photo to the stage?" His voice was different now, quieter, with something in it that Lisa couldn't quite identify. Shock? Recognition? Fear? Lisa's legs felt like rubber as she made her way down the aisle. Everyone was watching her. Cameras were definitely recording this. She climbed the steps to the stage, very aware that 2,000 pairs of eyes were following her every move. Up close, David Park looked older than he did in pictures. There were lines around his eyes, gray in his hair. But mostly he just looked stunned. She handed him the photo. He stared at it for a long time. The room was so quiet Lisa could hear him breathing. She watched his expression change, saw his jaw tighten, saw his hand start to shake slightly as he held the photo. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's from my family's photo album. That's my mom right there." Lisa pointed to the little girl in the red sweater. "The photo was taken at a community center in Detroit where my grandmother volunteered. That's you in the background, isn't it?" David looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was pain. Deep old pain that he'd probably spent years trying to hide. "I need to speak with you privately," he said. Then he turned to the confused audience. "I apologize, everyone. I'm going to have to cut this short. Thank you for coming." Before Lisa could process what was happening, David was leading her off the stage through a side door. 2 security guards followed them, along with a woman in a sharp business suit who was clearly some kind of assistant or lawyer, speaking rapidly into a phone. They ended up in a small conference room backstage. David sat down heavily in a chair, still holding the photo. The woman introduced herself as Jennifer Chen, his chief legal counsel. The security guard stood by the door looking confused about what exactly was going on. "Can everyone leave us alone for a moment?" David asked, not looking up from the photo. Jennifer frowned. "David, I don't think that's a good idea. We don't know who this woman is or what she wants. She's not a threat." He finally looked up at Lisa. "Are you?" "No," Lisa said quickly. "I promise I'm not trying to cause trouble or embarrass you or anything like that. I just needed to understand why you're in my family's photo." David studied her face for a long moment, then nodded to Jennifer. "Give us 10 minutes, please." Jennifer looked like she wanted to argue, but she left, taking the security guards with her. The door closed, and suddenly Lisa was alone with one of the richest, most powerful people in the country, and he looked like he might cry. "I haven't seen this picture in decades," he said softly. "I didn't even know it existed." Lisa sat down across from him. "So it is you." "Yes." He set the photo down carefully on the table between them like it was something precious and fragile. "This was taken at the Morrison Community Center. December 1978, I was 6 years old. What were you doing there?" David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion he was trying to control. "I was waiting to find out where I was going to sleep that night." The words hung in the air between them. Lisa felt her throat tighten as she watched David struggle with emotions he'd clearly kept buried for a very long time. "I don't understand," she said gently. "You were in foster care?" David nodded slowly, still staring at the photo. "My birth name wasn't David Park, it was Miguel Santos. My mother, her name was Elena. She had me when she was very young, just 17. She tried her best, but she had demons she couldn't fight. Addiction, mostly. Drugs, alcohol, whatever she could get her hands on." He paused, running his hand over his face. Lisa stayed quiet, sensing he needed to tell this story at his own pace. "We were homeless more often than not. Sometimes we stayed in shelters, sometimes with people I didn't know. I remember being hungry a lot, being scared a lot, and I remember my mom would have these periods where she'd get clean and everything would be okay for a while. She'd get a job, we'd have an apartment, then something would happen, and it would all fall apart again." Lisa's heart ached listening to him. This was so far from the polished public image she'd seen in articles and interviews. In the fall of 1978, we were living in Detroit. My mom was doing better. She had a job cleaning offices at night. During the day, she'd drop me off at the Morrison Community Center because she couldn't afford childcare, and she didn't want to leave me alone in our apartment. He smiled sadly. "There was this woman there who ran the place, Mrs. Johnson. She had gray hair and wore these colorful sweaters. She was kind to me. She never asked questions about why I was there so much, just made sure I had something to eat and a safe place to be." "That was my grandmother," Lisa whispered. "Dorothy Johnson." David's head snapped up. "That was your grandmother?" "Yes, she volunteered there for years. My mom and my aunt used to go there all the time. My aunt told me Grandma treated everyone like family, especially kids who needed extra care." Something shifted in David's expression. "She gave me a stuffed bear once." brown with a red ribbon around its neck. I don't know why it wasn't even Christmas yet. She just handed it to me one day and said every kid should have something soft to hold on to. His voice cracked. I kept that bear for years until I was way too old for stuffed animals. It was the first gift anyone had ever given me that was just mine. Lisa felt tears welling up in her eyes. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos until she found the one she was looking for. Is this her? She showed him a picture of her grandmother, taken maybe 10 years before she died. Dorothy was at a family barbecue, laughing at something off camera, her gray hair catching the sunlight. David stared at the photo, and this time he couldn't stop the tears from falling. That's her. That's Mrs. Johnson. I never knew her first name. I just knew she made me feel safe. They sat in silence for a moment while David composed himself. Lisa wanted to reach across the table and take his hand, but she didn't want to overstep. What happened after that Christmas? She asked softly. The one in the photo? David took a shaky breath. My mom relapsed hard that winter. I came home from the center one day and found her unconscious on the bathroom floor. I was 6 years old and I didn't know what to do, so I ran to a neighbor's apartment. They called an ambulance. Social services got involved. They said it wasn't safe for me to be with my mom anymore. Where did you go? Foster care. I spent about 6 months bouncing between different homes. Some were okay. Some weren't. I was angry all the time, confused about why I couldn't see my mom. No one explained things in a way a little kid could understand. I just knew I'd been taken away from the only person I'd ever belonged to, even if that belonging was messy and sometimes scary. Lisa noticed his hands were clenched on the table. She could see how hard this was for him to talk about. Then in the summer of 1979, I was placed with Catherine and James Park. They were a Korean-American couple who couldn't have children of their own. They were older, in their 40s, financially stable, and they wanted to adopt. I was this angry, traumatized little boy who barely spoke to them for the first 6 months. But they were patient. They were kind. Slowly I started to believe that maybe I could trust them. They adopted you? Yes. It took a while because they tried to locate my birth mother first. That was the law. They had to make sure she wasn't able to care for me and that she understood what adoption meant. But Elena had disappeared. The social workers couldn't find her. Eventually, the court terminated her parental rights and the adoption went through. I was almost 8 years old by then. David stood up and walked to the window, his back to Lisa. Catherine and James moved to California for James's work. They gave me everything. Good schools, music lessons, college prep tutors, unconditional love. They never made me feel like I wasn't really their son. When I graduated from MIT, both of them cried. When I started my first company, they were my biggest cheerleaders. James died 12 years ago. Catherine is in a nursing home now with dementia. She doesn't remember me most days. His voice was tight with emotion. I owe them everything. They saved my life, but there was always this hole inside me. This part of my story I didn't know how to talk about. The rich kid from California who went to MIT and started a tech company. That's a story people understand. That's a story that makes sense in Silicon Valley. But the homeless kid from Detroit whose mom was an addict? That version of me didn't fit the narrative. Lisa finally stood and walked over to where he stood. So you just erased that part? Pretended it didn't exist? Not erased, David said quietly. Hidden. I told myself it didn't matter where I came from, only where I was going. I threw myself into school, into work, into building something that would prove I was worth something. And it worked. I became successful beyond anything I could have imagined. But the more successful I got, the harder it became to talk about my past. How do you tell people you're a foster kid when you're sitting in boardrooms making deals worth millions? How do you explain that you barely remember your birth mother's face? Did you ever try to find her? Your birth mother? For years. I hired private investigators, searched every database I could access. I found traces of her here and there. An arrest record in Detroit in 1982. A stay at a rehab facility in Ohio in 1985. Then nothing. The trail went cold. He turned to face Lisa. Did your grandmother ever mention her? A woman named Elena Santos? Lisa thought hard, going through memories of her grandmother. I was pretty young when she died. I was only 12. But my aunt might know. She was older, she might remember more. I need to know what happened to her. David's voice was urgent now. For 30 years I've wondered. Is she alive? Did she ever get clean? Did she ever think about me? There was so much pain in his voice that Lisa made a decision right there. I'll help you. My Aunt Beatrice, she still lives in Detroit. She has a good memory for people and stories. If your mother was around that community center, if my grandmother knew her, Aunt B might remember. David looked at her with something like hope in his eyes. You'd do that? You don't even know me. I know enough, Lisa said. I know that little boy in that photo deserved better than what happened to him. And I know my grandmother would have wanted me to help if I could. She believed in looking out for people. Jennifer knocked on the door then, peeking her head in. David, we really need to deal with what just happened out there. The video is already going viral. We need to prepare a statement. David looked at the photo still lying on the table, then at Lisa. Give me your contact information. All of it, phone, email, address, and I need you to promise me something. What? Don't talk to the press about this, not yet. I need time to process all of this, and I need to do it privately. Can you do that? Lisa nodded. I didn't come here to create a media circus. I just wanted answers. You got more than that, David said with a slight smile. You found a part of me I thought was gone forever. They exchanged information quickly. Jennifer was getting more insistent, and Lisa could hear voices in the hallway. Probably other staff members or security trying to figure out what was going on. I have a company jet, David said as Lisa was about to leave. It can take you back to Detroit today if you want, and I'll cover your expenses for this trip. The hotel, the conference ticket, all of it. You don't have to do that. I want to, please. Lisa agreed, mainly because she could see how important it was to him. As she left the room, she looked back once. David was holding the photo again, staring at it with an expression that was part grief, part something else. Maybe relief. Maybe the beginning of healing. The flight back to Detroit was surreal. She was on a private jet, something she'd only seen in movies. The pilot and flight attendant treated her like she was someone important. It felt wrong somehow, like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. But when she got home and looked at that photo again, she understood. This wasn't about money or status or any of that. It was about a little boy who got lost in a family who didn't even know he existed. It was about connections that survived decades without anyone knowing they were there. That night, Lisa called her aunt. Aunt B, I need to ask you something important. Do you remember a woman named Elena Santos from back when you were a kid? She might have been at the community center sometimes. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Beatrice finally spoke, her voice was shaking. Oh, honey. Yes, I remember Elena. Why are you asking about her? Lisa's heart was pounding. You knew her? Beatrice sighed heavily on the other end of the phone. I didn't know her well, but yes, I knew who she was. Your grandmother talked about her sometimes. Why, where is this coming from? Can I come over tomorrow? I need to show you something, and it's too complicated to explain on the phone. You're scaring me a little, Lisa. It's nothing bad, I promise. It's just important. The next afternoon, Lisa sat in her aunt's small living room with the photo spread on the coffee table. She'd also brought her laptop to show Beatrice the pictures of David Park. That's the Morrison Center, Beatrice said immediately, adjusting her glasses to look at the photo more closely. Oh my goodness, that's your mother right there. Look how little she was, and there's your grandmother in the background talking to someone. Aunt B, look at this boy. Lisa pointed to the child standing alone near the doorway. Beatrice squinted at the image. I don't recognize him, should I? Lisa opened her laptop and pulled up a recent photo of David Park. Does he look familiar at all? Her aunt looked back and forth between the images several times. Wait, is that? No, that can't be. That's David Park, the tech guy. He's always on the news. It's him. I found him in Chicago. He confirmed it. Beatrice's hand went to her mouth. You what? You found David Park? How? Lisa explained everything. The email, the conference, the confrontation on stage, the private conversation. As she talked, she watched her aunt's expression change from confusion to shock, to something else entirely. His birth name was Miguel Santos. Lisa finished. His mother was Elena Santos. He said you might remember her. Beatrice sat back in her chair, her face pale. She was quiet for so long that Lisa started to worry. Aunt B, Elena Santos, Beatrice said softly. I haven't heard that name in over 40 years. But yes, I remember her. Not well, but I remember. What do you remember? Beatrice stood up and walked to her bookshelf. She pulled down an old photo album, even older than the one Lisa had found. Your grandmother kept this one. It was hers personally, not the family albums we all shared. She left it to me when she died because she said I was the one who remembered all the stories. She flipped through the pages carefully until she found what she was looking for. There. It was a photo from inside the community center. Several women were standing together, smiling at the camera. One of them was Lisa's grandmother, and next to her, looking thin and tired but smiling, was a young woman with dark hair. "That's Elena," Beatrice said, pointing. "This was taken in the spring of 1978, I think. I remember because it was right before everything fell apart for her." Lisa stared at the photo. This was David's mother, his birth mother, the woman he'd been searching for. What happened to her? Beatrice sat back down, the album in her lap. "Elena was part of a program your grandmother ran at the center. It was for young mothers who were struggling. They could bring their kids, get meals, take parenting classes, get help finding jobs or housing. Your grandma had a soft spot for girls like Elena who'd had tough lives and were trying their best." "Girls like Elena? She was an addict," Beatrice said bluntly. Everyone knew it. She'd come to the center sometimes clearly high or drunk. But your grandmother never judged her. She just kept offering help whenever Elena was ready to accept it. And there were periods when Elena would get clean, really try to turn things around. She'd be at the center every day taking care of her little boy, attending classes, looking for work. "Miguel," Lisa whispered. "That was her son. I didn't know his name. I just remember there was a little boy with her. Quiet kid, serious. Didn't play with the other children much. He'd just sit and watch everything like he was trying to figure out if it was safe to relax." Beatrice looked at the photo of young David again. That was him. What happened to Elena? Beatrice's face clouded over. She relapsed hard at the end of 1978. Your grandmother tried to help her, even offered to let her stay with us for a while so she could get on her feet. But Elena was too far gone by then. Social services took her son away, and after that Elena just sort of disappeared. I heard she left Detroit sometime in 1979. Did grandmother ever try to find her? Or the boy? She tried to find out what happened to the boy. She went to social services, tried to get information, but they wouldn't tell her anything because she wasn't family. It nearly broke her heart. She talked about him sometimes over the years, wondered where he ended up, if he was okay. She never forgot any of the kids who came through that center, but that little boy especially. I think because she saw Elena trying so hard and failing, and she felt like she should have done more to help. Lisa felt tears running down her face. She gave him a stuffed bear, he told me. He said it was the first gift anyone ever gave him that was just his. Beatrice covered her mouth, her own eyes filling with tears. Oh God, that sounds exactly like something she would do. Aunt B, David has been looking for his mother for 30 years. He doesn't know what happened to her. Is she still alive? Beatrice was quiet for a long moment. I need to make a phone call. There's someone who might know more than I do. She got up and went into the kitchen. Lisa could hear her talking in low tones but couldn't make out the words. When Beatrice came back 15 minutes later, her face was grim. That was Phyllis Green. She worked at the center with your grandmother. She's in her 80s now, but her memory is still sharp. Beatrice sat down heavily. "Lisa, honey, Elena Santos died in 1995. The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. Are you sure? Phyllis said Elena came back to Detroit in the early 90s. She was living on the streets, still using. She died of an overdose in an abandoned building. Phyllis only knew because her daughter was a nurse at the hospital where they brought the body. There was no next of kin listed, no one to claim her. She was buried in a county grave. Lisa thought about David, about the hope she'd seen in his eyes when he asked if his mother was still alive. How was she going to tell him this? Where is she buried? Phyllis gave me the information. It's at Woodmere Cemetery in the county section. No headstone, just a number marker. Lisa pulled out her phone. She had to tell David. He deserved to know, as painful as it would be. But when she called, it went to voicemail. She tried again an hour later. Same thing. She sent a text. I have information about your mother. It's important. Please call when you can. 3 days passed with no response. Lisa started to worry. Had he changed his mind about wanting to know? Was he avoiding her? She couldn't blame him if he was. She'd upended his entire life with that photo. Then on the 4th day, there was a knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, David Park was standing there with a woman she didn't recognize. I'm sorry I didn't call back, he said. I needed to bring someone with me for this. This is Catherine, my mother. The woman who raised me. The older woman smiled kindly at Lisa. She was elegant with silver hair and warm eyes. David told me everything. About the photo, about the community center, about your grandmother. I wanted to meet you and thank you for finding a piece of his past that we never knew existed. Lisa invited them in, her hands shaking slightly. She put on coffee and they sat in her small living room, the same space where she'd talked with her aunt days before. Your text said you had information about Elena, David said. His face was composed, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his coffee mug too tightly. I do, Lisa said gently. My aunt remembered her. She was able to find out what happened. She showed them the photo of Elena with Lisa's grandmother. David stared at it for a long time, touching the image of his mother's face with one finger. She looks happy here, he said quietly. My grandmother said she was trying really hard at that time. She wanted to be a good mother to you. What happened to her, Lisa? Catherine asked, taking David's hand. We need to know. Lisa took a deep breath. She died in 1995, I'm so sorry. It was an overdose. She'd come back to Detroit, but she was homeless. She died alone. The room was silent. David closed his eyes and Lisa saw tears slip down his cheeks. Catherine put her arm around him and he leaned into her like he was a child again, not a 50-year-old billionaire. At least now I know, he said finally, his voice rough. I spent so many years hoping she'd gotten clean somewhere, that she was living a quiet life and maybe sometimes thought about me. But at least now I know. There's something else, Lisa said. She's buried here in Detroit. My aunt found out where. There's no headstone, just a number, but we know where she is. David looked up at her. Can you take me there? The next day, the three of them drove to Woodmere Cemetery. The county section was in the back, row after row of small flat markers with just numbers on them. People who died alone, unclaimed, unnamed, except in records buried in city offices. They found grave, 3847. There was nothing there but grass in that small metal marker with numbers stamped into it. David knelt down and placed his hand on the ground. Hi, Mom, it's Miguel, your son. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. Lisa and Catherine stood back, giving him privacy. Lisa saw Catherine wipe tears from her eyes. She would have been so proud of him, Catherine said softly, if she could see what he became, what he's accomplished. Not the money or the company, but the man he is. I think she tried her best with what she had, Lisa replied. My grandmother saw that. She saw Elena fighting to be better. After a while, David stood up. I want to buy this plot and the ones around it. I want to put a proper headstone here with her real name, Elena Santos, and I want to know if anyone else is buried nearby who didn't have anyone to claim them. David, Catherine said gently, you can't save everyone. No, he agreed, but I can make sure she's not forgotten. And maybe some of the others too. He turned to Lisa. Your grandmother helped my mother when no one else would. She gave a scared little boy a stuffed bear and made him feel like he mattered. I can't repay that, but I can honor it. She would have liked that, Lisa said. They stood there for a while longer. Three people bound together by old photos and painful histories, and a connection none of them had known existed until a few weeks ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, and in that moment, Lisa felt her grandmother's presence so strongly it made her catch her breath. Thank you, David said to Lisa as they walked back to the car, for not letting this go, for finding me, for caring enough to track me down in Chicago like some kind of detective. Lisa laughed. My friends thought I was crazy. Maybe a little, David smiled. But the best things happen when people are willing to be a little crazy for something that matters. As they drove away from the cemetery, Lisa looked back once. Tomorrow there would be flowers on grave 3847. And soon there would be a headstone with a name. Elena Santos would no longer be just a number. The weeks after finding Elena's grave were strange for everyone involved. The video from the conference had gone viral like David's team feared. Millions of people watched Lisa stand up with that photo and ask her question. The internet being what it is, people dug into everything. They found out who Lisa was, where she taught, details about her life she'd never intended to share publicly. Some people called her a hero for reuniting David with his past. Others accused her of doing it for attention or money. The theories got wild. Some claimed she was his long-lost sister. Others said it was all a publicity stunt for David's company. Lisa stopped reading the comments after the first few days. David's PR team released a simple statement. Mr. Park has been reunited with information about his biological family through the kindness of a stranger. He requests privacy during this personal time. It didn't stop the speculation, but it helped a little. What surprised Lisa most was how her life changed in small ways. Other people who'd been in foster care started reaching out, sharing their own stories. Teachers from around the country emailed her about students they'd tried to help, wondering if they'd made any difference. It made her realize how many people carried these kinds of stories, these hidden pieces of themselves they'd learned to tuck away. 3 months after that day at the cemetery, David called Lisa. "I want you to come to California. There's something I need to show you, and I want you to meet some people." She flew out on a Friday afternoon, again on his company jet, which still felt surreal every time. David picked her up himself from the small private airport. No driver, no assistance. Just him in a regular car wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the suit she'd seen in all the photos. "You look different," she said as she got in. "I feel different," he admitted. "Finding out about my mother, about your grandmother, it's changed something in me. Catherine says I seem lighter somehow, less like I'm carrying something heavy around all the time." He drove them through the California hills to a property that took Lisa's breath away. It wasn't his house. It was something else entirely. A large building that looked both modern and welcoming, surrounded by gardens and trees, with a playground visible in the distance. "What is this place?" Lisa asked as they got out of the car. "This is the Elena Santos Foundation," David said. "We broke ground 2 months ago. It'll be finished by next spring." He walked her through the construction site, explaining as they went. It was going to be a comprehensive resource center for families dealing with addiction and the foster care system. There would be residential treatment programs, childcare for parents in recovery, job training, counseling services, and transitional housing. "The thing is," David explained as they stood in what would eventually be the main reception area, "my mother didn't fail because she didn't want to get better. She failed because she didn't have enough support. Every time she got clean, she had nowhere to go. No one to help her stay clean, no resources to help her be the mother she wanted to be. This is incredible, David. There's more." He led her to another part of the building. "This wing is going to be called the Dorothy Johnson Family Center. It's specifically for programs that keep families together instead of separating them. Your grandmother believed in that. She believed in giving people chances and support, not just judgment." Lisa felt tears welling up. She would have loved this. "I hope so." David showed her architectural drawings and plans. "We're also creating an endowment for the Morrison Community Center back in Detroit. It's still there, still serving the neighborhood, but it needs resources. And I'm funding a nationwide program to put headstones on unmarked graves of people who died without family to claim them, starting with the cemetery where my mother is buried." "You're doing all this because of one old photo?" David shook his head. "I'm doing this because of what that photo represented. A connection I didn't know I needed. A reminder that I didn't come from nowhere. That people cared about me even when I was just a scared little kid in the background of someone else's family picture. Your grandmother cared. Your family cared even if they didn't know where I ended up. They sat on some construction equipment looking out at the view of the valley below." "Can I ask you something?" Lisa said. "Why didn't you ever talk about your past before? I mean, a story like yours, rising from foster care to where you are now, that's inspiring." David was quiet for a moment. "Fear mostly. Fear that people would see me differently. Fear that investors wouldn't trust me if they knew I came from nothing. Fear that I'd be defined by my trauma instead of my accomplishments. And maybe if I'm being honest, shame. Shame that my mother couldn't beat her addiction. Shame that I wasn't enough reason for her to get better. You know that wasn't your fault, right? You were a child. My head knows that. My heart is still learning it." He smiled sadly. "But having Catherine here, my real mother, the one who raised me and loved me and gave me everything, that helps. She's never made me feel like I had to hide where I came from. She seems wonderful. She is. And you know what? Since all this happened, she's been different too. Happier somehow. She told me that she always felt like there was a part of me she couldn't reach. A locked room I wouldn't let her into. Now that room is open. We talk about things we never talked about before. Even with her dementia and her clear moments, we're closer than we've ever been." A few weeks later, David came to Detroit. This time he brought Catherine and a small film crew. They were making a documentary about the foster care system, and they wanted to include Lisa's grandmother's story and the community center. They interviewed Beatrice, who brought out all the old photos and told stories about Dorothy Johnson and her work. They filmed at the Morrison Center, which was still serving the neighborhood after all these years. The director was delighted to meet David and hear about the endowment. "Your grandmother would come in here every single day," she told Lisa on camera. "Even when she was sick, even when the weather was bad. She said this place was her ministry, her calling. She believed every child deserved to feel safe and valued." They also filmed at the cemetery, where a beautiful headstone now marked Elena's grave. It read, "Elena Santos, 1960-1995. Beloved mother, at peace now." But the most powerful moment came when David asked Lisa to have dinner with him and several other people who'd been in foster care and were now working to change the system. There were lawyers, social workers, teachers, a state senator, and a woman who ran a nonprofit connecting foster youth with mentors. As they shared their stories, Lisa realized what David had built wasn't just a foundation or a building. It was a community of people who understood what it meant to be lost and then found, to come from hard places and choose to make those places better for others. "Lisa, I want to offer you something," David said toward the end of the dinner. "The Elena Santos Foundation needs a director of family programs, someone who understands education, who cares about kids, who gets what we're trying to do here. The salary is 3 times what you make teaching, full benefits, and you'd be helping to build something from the ground up." Lisa was stunned. "David, I'm not qualified for something like that. I'm just a middle school teacher. You're someone who cared enough about a stranger in an old photo to track him down across the country. You're someone who understands that every person matters, that every connection matters. That's exactly who we need," he smiled. "Think about it. No pressure. If you want to stay in teaching, I respect that. But the offer stands." That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her grandmother, about all those kids who'd come through the Morrison Center over the years. She thought about her students, the ones who came from tough situations, the ones who needed someone to believe in them. She thought about that little boy in the photo, standing alone in the background, not knowing that 40-some years later, he'd build something beautiful from all that pain. In the morning, she called David. "I want to do it. I want to help build this." The next year was a whirlwind. Lisa moved to California and threw herself into creating programs for the foundation. She worked with David and his team to design services that actually helped families instead of just processing them through a system. She hired staff who had lived experience with foster care and addiction. She made sure everything they did honored the spirit of what her grandmother had done at that community center all those years. The foundation opened on a sunny day and hundreds of people came to the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Catherine was there, having one of her clear days, beaming with pride. Beatrice flew in from Detroit with several other people who'd known Dorothy Johnson. The mayor gave a speech. News cameras recorded everything. But for Lisa, the most meaningful moment came later after the crowds had gone. She and David stood in the Dorothy Johnson Family Center, in a quiet room where parents and children would be able to spend time together during treatment. On the wall was the photo, the one from the Christmas party in 1978. It had been enlarged and professionally framed with a